Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Other Americans, our global roundtable where conversations are as diverse as our backgrounds. Join two globe-trotting expats as they discuss how living abroad reshapes the concept of being American, connecting cultures, challenging stereotypes, and celebrating differences one story at a time. I am your host, Noor Sultan.
And I am Ronnie Caldwell, also known as Mr. C.
Hey, yo, Mr. C. First episode of The Other Americans. How we feeling?
Dude, I am excited. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to this.
Just an FYI, it's
Yeah,
about 9:07 p.m. for me. What time is it for you?
it is 7:07 a.m. for me.
You don't seem groggy at all.
No, I've been up for a while. I wake up early. I woke up, got my shower in, started reading, got some
Mm-hmm.
little push-ups in, made the
Okay,
coffee. I'm
okay.
all excited this morning, man. I'm ready to rumble.
Yeah, so I'm in LA. Mr. C is in Saudi, but not for long. He's going to
That's right.
Bali. What
That's
is it?
right, dude. Like
Bali answers.
in a few weeks, we'll be out of Saudi. We'll be in Texas, and then Texas for a few months, and then to Bali. I'll
Yeah.
be
Are you
looking
excited?
forward to it.
You're moving to,
Yeah,
this is like, how many countries has this been for you now?
to live in
Yeah.
one, America, Kazakhstan, India, Saudi Arabia. This will be the like fifth place.
Damn, you're TCK through
Mhm.
and through.
Well, yeah. I mean, I started late. I mean, my children are really TCKs, but yeah, for me, sure.
Yeah. Dude,
Mhm.
today I was
Yeah.
hanging out with my friends from university
Okay.
and I got kind of sad because I was like it's like weird. So like when you're a TCK, I don't know if this is like only me, but with my other friends that I've, grown up with in Saudi, what?
Define TCK if people don't know what it means.
Oh, TCK is a third culture kid. So
Mm.
I'm born American, but I have mixed blood. So I'm Pakistani and I'm Filipino. And I also have the American culture attached to me. So third culture kid. It's very common with
Mm.
expats, very common with people who live overseas. Mr. C is also a
Yeah,
mixed kid or adult.
that's right.
Right,
Kid at heart in some ways. Kid at heart in some ways, but yes, old
right.
man now.
Well, what are you?
So I'll tell you this. Back in my day when I was born, I identified as black. Right on my birth certificate it says I'm a Black American.
Hmm.
But to get really specific, my father was half black, half German,
Hmm.
and my mother is a Louisiana Creole, which is
Hmm.
sort of a mix of French, European ancestry,
Yeah.
African American ancestry, and Native American. So
Oh,
I'm all that stuff mixed together,
wow.
and then I grew up in, and then to make it all interesting, I grew up Catholic in a neighborhood where most of the in an environment where most of the black people were not Catholic, and so I went to mass with mostly Mexican Americans and grew up around
Mm,
Mexican Americans. So yeah, and then and I went to 11 different schools in the United States, moved around a lot in the
damn.
United States,
That's so
and then
many.
ended up marrying a Filipino American who both her parents are from the Philippines, but she was born in Houston. We
Hmm.
got together and had some beautiful babies who were then raised overseas, and they are just
Hella
humans. They are as mixed
ambiguous.
as it can be. There it is. So there it is. That's the life we've lived.
Yeah, but like TCK as hell. Like you're kind
Mm,
of a
for
little
sure.
more than I would say. Like yeah, I got some Pakistani and Filipino in me, but like the most I would go back is like India and like China, like for my ancestors.
Sure.
But
Sure.
then I've
Sure.
like never even met those people. They're dead. So
I got you. I got you.
but yeah, so when I was hanging out with my friends today, I was like kind of sad because so I spent 3 months with you in Saudi, and it was
Right.
such a great reminder of like the people that kind of knew me from Adam, like people who knew
Sure.
me since I was a kid, and then you
Sure.
know you understand the socioeconomic background, the place that we live in, why I am the way
Mm,
I am, and
okay.
it's often just really difficult to come back to America and explain my life to like people who have honestly just never left the city that they lived in, that they grew up in.
For sure. For
And
sure.
it was just like, oh, I was like back here again, and I was like, oh man, I didn't miss this. Like it sounds bad, but I really didn't miss it. And
Mm,
like obviously it's a privilege to live overseas and being able to travel and have a passport. But I was just
hmm
like I'm not riding camels out there. Like I'm not Jasmine and I'm not Aladdin. Like it's not crazy over there. Like it,
hmm
not everyone is like this rich Saudi man who has like a mansion with like a grand staircase. Like that they really
For
think
sure.
that Saudi is all that they see is like on the media. Like that's what they think it
hmm
is.
Right.
And they're like, "Were you safe? Are you safe over there?" And I'm like,
hmm
"I'm safer over there than I am here in America."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's just what is it? It's a lack of exposure,
Yeah.
right? Um, and I understand it, right? Because a lot of my family never left the city where they're raised in, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like they wouldn't have the potential to do so, but it's a risk. I mean, what
Mm-hmm.
you understand is that expat community, well, when you're living in it, it feels
Yeah.
like, oh, this is normal, but it's very odd. I mean, it's
It's
actually
so
a very
weird.
small part of the population. Most people, stay where they are, and I think everything has a cost and a price. I mean, I know that there's definite advantages to being in one place, being around where your family is and stuff like that. But then
Mm-hmm.
there's also definite richness in the experiences that we have, right?
Yeah.
And so, but there are different, man. There are different, and you get these interesting questions. I remember Damien getting questions about because he had his group of friends explaining his group of friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
And someone saying to him, "Wait, one of your friends is Pakistani?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, he's Pakistani." He goes, "Oh, well, they hate us, don't they?" And then he's like, "Oh, Damien's like, no, I mean, they don't hate me. I don't,
Oh
like
God.
we're at least Zachy doesn't hate me."
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Oh
So
man.
that's how it is.
It's and I can't even like fault them. You know what I mean? Like if
No,
I didn't
no,
ever leave America, I would probably be the same. And
for sure.
like it just like by chance my dad applied overseas and then that happened. But like
Right.
man, it was just like okay, I'm
Well,
yeah. But
well, I can give a story also on the other side. When I first went overseas, I was in Kazakhstan,
yeah.
and I was teaching these, and I was raised in San Antonio, right? So I was raised in San Antonio. Um, then I lived in Memphis, Tennessee. I lived in McAllen, Texas, and then I lived in Colorado and Denver area,
Mhm.
and then I lived in Houston, Austin.
Yeah.
And when my lived experience was never America as homogeneous, right?
Mhm.
One like basically everywhere I was pretty diverse, right?
Yeah.
Lots of different people. But when I went to Kazakhstan, and the kids at one point in time, they're like kind of whispering to themselves, and we were talking, and I was like, "What are you whispering about? What's up?" And they're
Mhm.
like, "Mr. Caldwell, you're not American, are you?" I'm like,
Mhm.
"No, I'm American. What do you mean?" And they're like, "No, but you're not like full American." And I'm like, "I'm full American. Yeah, I was born in America." And they're like, "Yeah, but like you're American and something else, right? Like not." And what I realized they meant was they were trying to ask if I was not fully white
Oh, okay.
when they were, because in their perception, American is a white person.
Yeah.
But my perception coming from where I'm from is like,
Yeah.
no, there's a lot of non-white Americans. I was
Mhm.
raised primarily around non-white Americans.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me is that there's also that context
Mhm.
in Kazakhstan. The kids were there. And then when I looked around the international school, I was like, oh, most all the international teachers are white.
Mhm.
You know,
Oh, I see.
when I
I
looked at like
see.
most of the international teachers from the states
Mhm.
are white Americans, and many of them
Yeah.
from smaller towns, Midwest, and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
And so I was like, oh, so there's also an interesting perception that some of these kids are getting of what America looks like and what America is.
Yeah.
And I even had kids ask me, what are Mexicans like? Because there was no Mexican kids. Like we were a
Oh,
diverse
really?
school. We had like 40 different, but there were no Mexican kids in Kazakhstan, that school. And so
Mhm.
they were like, you were raised around a lot of Mexicans? I was like, yeah, yeah, my best friend's Mexican. They were like, what are Mexicans like? I'm like,
Just like you.
I never even, I had never even thought to myself to try to explain what Mexican people are like. I was like,
Yeah.
what is Mike Mendoza like? He is a dork, you know, like he's my good friend. I love him, you know, and everything. But yeah, so you know, there's that.
Mhm.
There's this experience that we have, all of us have some level of ignorance because we're not experienced to everything. But I
Mhm.
think when you're an expat, what it does teach you is to be a little bit more curious. I
Yeah.
think the experience is that I
Mhm.
need to talk to people. I don't know about them until I talk to them. So I think
Yeah.
that that's the experience you get as an expat, is you realize that most people coming from most different environments are we have there's diversity, but there's a lot of similarities, right?
Of
Like,
course.
you
Yeah.
know, at the human level, most of us want pretty much the same thing,
Yeah.
wherever we go.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a reason why all of these diverse people are in the same place. You know what I mean? Like,
That's right. That's
there's
right.
always this connecting
Hmm.
factor. But it's so interesting because what you said about like the kids asking like, "You're not American, though, right?" And it's like I always get these questions like, "Where are you from?" It means so. It has a double meaning depending on where you are. When you're in America, they're like, "Oh, where are you from?" They're asking about like where your parents from, like what's your ethnicity, where is like your lineage or bloodline come from. And then when you're in the expat community, they're like, "Oh, where are you from?" Which is like, are you like American? Are you like, British or something?
Yeah.
When I was visiting you, and I was at the gate and you have to like show your ID and everything, the guard was like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm Filipino Pakistani." And this is after
Mhm.
being in California for like a year and a half. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, Filipino Pakistani." And he goes, "No, Ameriki, Ameriki." I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
American."
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, American, American."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, damn, I forgot. I forgot what it was like to be here."
Right. That because when you come, and I think that's what makes it a little bit easier being a mixed kid. I think for my own kids, because they were so mixed,
Mhm.
being raised overseas, everybody just wants to know your nationality because
Yeah.
that's the currency. Everyone's
Mhm.
like, "Are you American? Are you from Canada? You
Yeah.
know, where are you from?" You know what I mean?
It's a
Because there's
status.
40 different nationalities, so everybody wants to know, okay, what nationality are you from?
Yeah.
But if they had been in the States, they would have been forced to answer a lot of questions about, and so much, at least me growing up in the States, you had to pick,
Mhm.
like, to say that you were mixed. I mean, and I don't know if it's gotten any better or whatever, but there was this idea that you needed to pick, right?
Oh,
And
really?
and I did, yeah, and I did very,
Oh.
like, for me growing up, like I identified straight up as black. I would tell people I
Mhm.
was black. I'm black
Yeah.
now, and I can think of it now when you see me,
Yeah.
like you're like, what, you know?
That man is not black. He has blue eyes.
Right. But you know, but that's how I identified, right? And it
Yeah.
was only because of my great grandmother, who was Creole in Louisiana, that I was saying that around her at one point in time, and then she kind of like schooled me to this idea that while, you know, you might say that you
Mhm.
don't want to, her, you know, and Creole's been mixed for a long time, right? There's a legacy of being mixed in Louisiana for generations and generations. And so her idea was, don't don't allow yourself to reject any part of you, any part of your history, and don't not celebrate. You know, don't insult a piece of who you are by acting like that part of you doesn't exist, right? And so that was a, you know, kind of a, like, kind of hard to work with as a kid, and then and get comfortable with that. But I tried to raise my kids being comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But you're right, like the back to your other point was, yeah, you ask about nationality when you're, you know, an expat overseas, but then when you're back in the States, everybody wants to know
Yeah.
your ethnicity.
I don't know about you, but like in the States, when they ask me where I'm from, then I have to like I always tell people I'm like I should just make a pamphlet about my identity when I come to the States because they ask so many questions. They go like, "Oh,
Sure.
you're Filipino Pakistani. How does that happen?" And then I either give them a straight answer like where my parents met, or I go, "When a man loves a woman."
That's right. That's right. I was about to say, I mean, what do you mean? How does that happen? Well,
Yeah. I they fell in love and they had a kid. I don't really know what you want me to say. But then they go
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and then I don't know about you, but I always get asked, which side do you like better?
Which side do you like better?
Yeah. And I'm like, what
Okay.
kind of fucked up question is that? Like, you want
Mm.
to ask me if I like my dad's side or my mom's side better? They're both kind
Yeah.
of weird. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, I think, you know, the way for me it's different is that I think when people find out that you're black or mixed with African American, they just assume that's your side. Because I think the story in the United States was it didn't matter to anybody else. Like that's why they implemented the one drop rule. Like white people weren't going to accept you
Mm.
if you had any black blood.
Oh, right.
So there was still a perception of you like you were more likely to be accepted by the black people than you
Mhm.
were, you know, white people at a time in American history. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think my wife gets it more. My wife, like she, because you know, Asians, you guys,
Oh my God.
you know,
Don't even get me
I think
started.
it's a tough thing because you know she's born in Houston and Lyra is just Houston as it can be. Like,
Mhm.
she loves Houston. She loves all the teams from Houston. You
Yeah.
know, she reps Southside Houston, right?
Mhm.
But man, people ask her, so where are you from? And she's like, I'm from Houston. And she doesn't even like, she knows what they mean. And I'm like, man, you know what
Yeah.
they mean.
But it's okay. You gotta egg them on a bit. Because like you can say where you from, just say
Yeah.
what is your ethnicity. It cuts the
Right,
fat.
right, right.
Because then I'm like,
That's true.
are
That's
you
true.
asking if I'm American or are you
Hmm.
asking, what
Hmm.
my DNA deoxyribonucleic acid says?
Sure.
Uh, it,
You know.
it's like it's not too bothersome now. I think
Mm,
before I would really question. I'm like, why does it even matter? You know, but
mm.
I guess, but it's a lot more common now to be mixed and
Y-
ambiguous. You know?
Yeah, I saw a thing even, and it's going to be more, right? Because I saw a thing recently. It was said 1 in 5 couples are mixed race couples now.
Yeah,
So I mean, it's just more and more increasing that there's going to be more and more kids who
yeah.
are mixed race, and people like are having. I think one of the most interesting things I've seen though is because you have more and more people who are mixed race and but then feel like maybe they shouldn't have to talk about race, like my kids won't, you know, you're still going
Hmm.
to have to like talk about race, like
Yeah.
you know. And so I think the navigating of that I think is tough because um you know, especially in the United States, race is such an interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a thing, it's definitely an American story.
It's very divisive.
um Right, right, right. And so, also just trying to make sure that trying to pretend that because your kids are mixed, that they're not going to need context, they're not going to need talking about like their histories and their family histories and all that kind of thing. I think is it should be interesting because I would say that I've known mixed people who grown up with a lot of trauma around it, right? Like at least they had like a really rough experience with it or
Yeah.
this, that, and the other. Um, I can't say that I felt that. Like I can't say
Hmm.
that I felt that, but my entire family was mixed,
Yeah.
right? So I wasn't like, you know, it wasn't for me. The entire family was mixed, so I think that was an advantage
Yeah.
rather than being like, you know, I'm the only mixed kid in the family. On this side of the
Yeah.
family, everyone's white, or this everyone's
Yeah.
black, that kind of thing. So I do know that that people have sometimes people have had really big trouble around it. What I just wish when I was little, I
Yeah.
wish that I had just been a little darker. When I was a kid, I was like, I just wish I was a little darker so that when I say I'm black, not everybody, because if
People
my hair
believe
wasn't
you.
out, like if my hair, yeah, because if my hair was out, then it was like, okay, it's kind of kinky. So maybe
Hmm.
so, right? I
Yeah.
used to get actually, people used to ask me if I was Puerto Rican sometimes because I was hanging like because a lot of
Oh.
my friends were Mexican. I'd be hanging with them and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
then, you know, I had the curly kind of kinky hair, and they're thinking,
Yeah.
oh, maybe he's just not a white, maybe something else. So people are like, oh, you
Hmm.
Puerto Rican or this, that, and the other. I'm like,
Yeah. Or
no, not
Dominican,
quite.
like
Yeah,
some
yeah,
way.
yeah,
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, so
Yeah.
you know, I just that was my one thing. I wish I was a little darker. And
Hmm.
apparently, my family was waiting for me to darken up as well. When I was born, everybody was like, well, maybe he'll get darker as he gets older.
Like
It just never really
he just
happened.
needs
It
to
never really
bake in
came
the
to be.
sun. He needs to go in the sun oven and just get
That's
some
right.
melanin. But you know what's
The German blood
interesting?
was strong, I guess, you know.
So
Hmm.
now it's not that crazy to be mixed, but people like,
Yep.
so especially in America, I noticed that people love to like how do I say this? They like to be a minority sometimes. They like to
Hmm.
have that excuse to have like a struggle, I think. And there's so many it's really strange. I
Okay.
don't know, but like there's so many
Sure.
people who will like make their mixed race their personality. And
Mm,
I've only met a few other Pakistani Filipinos. Okay, I've only met one
okay.
other, like I mean besides my siblings obviously. But
Sure.
I've only met one other in Islamabad. And then and then there's like two Instagrammers that I've found that are like really big influencers that are Filipino
Okay.
Pakistani. But they
Okay.
make it like they like monetize on it. So like
Interesting.
they'll be like oh my god, like I'm a Filipino Pakistani, and then they'll like tell their story about being like a Pakistani Filipino, and then they'll really like make it their personality, and then people will really like dive into what their genetic makeup is, and they get really interested in it. But
Mm.
never I've never done that in my life where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm the only like Filipino Pakistani ever. This is like so hard, and like, oh my god, I'm just like so different. You guys just don't understand. Who cares? I'm sorry. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, you know, you know,
Like it's so
I mean,
weird. I've never done that in my life.
everybody has their thing, right? So, maybe their journey was that tough for them. I'm not sure.
I don't know,
Maybe
man.
really something that they yeah, I don't know. My grandmother, my
Yeah.
grandma Marion told me a long time ago. She said, and it's always stayed with me. "Don't," she said, "don't identify with my suffering."
Oh.
And then I was like, okay. And what she meant by that was like, she tried to emphasize to me, because at one point in time we were having a conversation, and man, I was reading all this like revolutionary stuff. I was, reading James Baldwin. I was reading like the Black Panthers, and I was getting real
Yeah,
revolutionary
yeah.
with
Uh-huh.
my little incognito ass, right? Like really getting like, "Rah,"
With the
this, that,
people.
and I was talking to her, and and my family was very good about telling the stories about their struggles, right? My family
Mm-hmm.
would just let me know what used to happen, and everything they went through with Jim Crow, because they're all from the South, right? And I mean, hell, it was illegal for my grandfather to be with my grandmother in the South when he brought his kids home, because he was in the military. Um, and so, but my grandmother, when I would get kind of mad about this and everything else, she said, "Did it happen to you though?" I was like, "No, no." And she goes,
Yeah.
"And that's what we worked for."
Yeah.
She goes, "And you haven't seen that, right?" And she
Yeah.
goes, "So you'll have your own suffering." She
Mm-hmm.
goes, "But don't care." She said, "It doesn't make any sense for you to carry mine."
Mm-hmm.
And so that
That's
always
actually
stuck
quite
with me.
beautiful.
And that always stuck with me because, um, and I don't know if that's a very popular sentiment nowadays. Like
Mm,
it seems that
yeah.
people do want to go back and definitely identify with suffering. Maybe they haven't experienced, but they
Yeah.
estimate from somebody else or this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Um, and I gotta say, like I didn't experience what my grandparents experienced or even my parents experienced,
Yeah.
and but I understand it. I understand what happened. I understand that there's a lot of pain, and they experience violence.
Mhm.
They experience all kinds of things that are terrible.
Yeah.
But at the same point in time, having the perspective, it would be embarrassing for me
Mm,
to act like I'm all devastated if they didn't seem that devastated and they tried to get me here. You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I will ask my grandma because she's technically Bahari from India.
Uh-huh.
And
Sure.
then, the Hindus kind of kicked out the Muslims. And then
Uh-huh.
Pakistan was created also during that time.
Uh-huh. The
And
partition, yeah.
our family went to Karachi. So I
Mm.
when I recently visited her in Karachi during Eid, I asked her, I was like, do you identify as an Indian? Because, you're technically Indian, and she still loves like her tribe. She visited it like maybe 10,
Uh-huh.
15 years ago, and they knew her and all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
And she was like, no, I am Pakistani. And
Okay.
it's very like, like all that struggle and strife, that partition
It's still
happened,
there for her. Mhm.
but she will not say that she's Indian. She will say that like she knows Indian food and cuisine, and there's a history there, and she's originally from there, but she says she'll never identify as an Indian, and like that pain is still with her. And then my
Mm.
brother's like very gung ho about, he's like, yeah, we're Pakistani, not Indian. It's a bit, it's a bit, but you know, like I didn't learn about the fact that there is kind of like tension between India and Pakistan until I did come overseas in Saudi
Yeah.
and I went to the school. And it's funny
Yeah.
because in the schools, they are so I don't want to say it, but like they're racist. Like they're racist and they play on stereotypes, but like no one gets offended because it's
Yeah.
like it's very much like, oh yeah, this is the history that happened, but we're still here together as friends.
That's
And
right.
it was so like interesting because I coming from like an American school where if someone would like, you know, say the N word or someone called someone like an Asian racial slur, there'd be a fight. And then I
Yeah.
came to Saudi and that was happening, but then they were laughing and like, we're best friends. And I was like,
Yeah.
what?
It's strange because in some ways because they're disconnected from that history, right? And they're disconnected from that, then there's almost you would think there's almost a naivety
Mm-hmm.
about it. But it's interesting because it's this weird thing that I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But yeah, they'll make jokes about each other's. It's very
Yeah.
common for people to make jokes about each other's nationality
Yeah.
because everyone's in there together. And I think it's so much context because look, you know I like you, you know you're my friend, you know, back and forth, and then we'll make jokes, right? And it's
Yeah.
fine. You just hope that they don't go somewhere that all of a sudden
Yeah.
joke to someone who's just not ready for it, and then they
Mm-hmm.
get like punched or something, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but for sure, it's a different context. You have that, and yeah, you have all these Indian kids hanging out with Pakistani kids, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, different folks. Like, I mean, we
Yeah.
even have some Ukrainian students and Russian students jive, and there's not a problem over
Mm-hmm.
here, right where we
Yeah.
are. And so there is a it's almost like a little bubble, right? It's not really the real world,
Yeah.
but it's this interesting experiment because you're
Mm-hmm.
able to see, well, when we're all kind of thrown together, we can get
Mm-hmm.
along with a lot of people who we might never actually talk to in
Yeah.
our early life. Yeah,
And
for
there's
sure.
like such a high tolerance where it's like sometimes you know cultural differences do arise, but then
Yeah.
people are like, oh yeah, but that's just because of where they're from, that's just their cultural background. there's
Yeah, that's
there
interesting.
there's
That's
no
interesting,
like
right? Yeah.
real expectation for like that other person to kind of bend into the life of the person who's like receiving all of their
Right.
cultural projection, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
In
Mm-hmm.
America, it's kind of like, oh, it doesn't matter where you're from, you need to treat people with this respect and decency and stuff like that, you know? But
Yeah.
like in when I come to Saudi and like overseas, it's like, oh yeah, but that person's just where they're from. So like it's okay. It's just a difference of
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a higher degree of tolerance because you know everyone's from somewhere different. And no, I think there's still people who get hurt feelings, right? And
Oh,
they
for
feel, hey,
sure,
I
for
don't
sure.
like that, and then
Yeah.
you're going to have that kind of thing. But you do learn to like flow a bit more like water, right? As you go different places
Mm-hmm.
because you're constantly a visitor, really. Like all of
Yes.
us are we're a visitor here. So
Visitor
as a
visa.
visitor, yeah, and as a visitor, you're figuring things out, and you're figuring out, well, how do you live in this environment? Like, and I think that it allows for a certain amount of openness and continuing to learn because I think when you're in one place and you're in the States, you know how things should go, right? This is how things work here.
Yeah.
And I think the people who have the toughest time
Mm-hmm.
internationally, I think people from my own country, is they just can't stop saying, this is not how it is in the States.
Yeah.
This is not how it is in the States. Man, you got to let go of that quick. Like you're
Uh-huh.
like, yeah, that's right. It's not. And because we're not there anymore.
Yeah.
So it's the ability to and if you can't do that, you really don't get the expat lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like it's never going to be for you if you're constantly wishing for it to be the way it was where you came from. You have to end up working things
Yeah.
out, man, and being receptive.
But you know, it's so there's this one guy that my dad worked with, and he was a bachelor, and
Mm-hmm.
he came and he went through the whole interview process, and you know, he bought a PS4, he bought so much tech for his apartment, and he stayed here for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and then he just quit and left because he didn't like
Wow.
it. Like he couldn't like he himself was not able to adjust to the environment and he didn't like how it was. And
Mm.
he ended up like just giving away all of his stuff. So we got like a bunch of free tech. I got a free PS4 from him. God bless you. That guy, I don't even know his name, but thank you for the PS4, dude. You're awesome. Um
Yeah, thanks, guy. Jeez, so 2 weeks he just was gone.
he just left. And I
Mm,
wonder, I'm like, I don't really hear that many stories of people who do come to a different country and then just leave, because even though there are some people I mean Saudi or overseas, that are unhappy, I feel
mm,
like the lifestyle is sometimes just like nice enough that it doesn't really convince people to leave. Where it's like
yeah.
there's a different type of ease when you leave America. Sometimes there's not like
Hmm.
that work focused culture, that
Yeah.
hustle. And
Hmm.
then even if there's like so many things that make them feel that it's not a home for them, they still
Hmm.
stay, and they'll stay until they need to retire and then go back to America where they don't have to work there anymore, where they're retired.
Right. I've seen something very similar because I have family that's in the military, and so they travel overseas with the military. And what's interesting is that a lot of expats, I think, when they go back to the States, have the same withdrawals as people who get out of the military and are all of a sudden in the States because it's a ready-made community.
Uh-huh.
Expats, since you're like, oftentimes how we live, the
Yeah.
nice part of it is, well, it's tax-free. You're also oftentimes you get compensated pretty well. You live well, but you also usually have a bit more time because there's like this
Yeah.
stress in the States. There's a busyness in the States when you get
Yeah.
there. Expat, sometimes it slows life down a little bit for you,
Yeah.
and people make friends pretty quick because
Yeah.
all of you are visitors. So you're like, oh, you just got here, and you make friends pretty quickly. And they
Yeah.
say it's the same thing when people live overseas in like in a military base,
Hmm.
and then you get into a neighborhood in the States, and none of your neighbors talk to you, right?
No, not at
You get to the neighborhood
all.
and you're like, it's not like you just go out and say, hey, how are you doing? And if you
Mm-mm.
do, you seem strange, right? People are like, well, what? Why are you so
You're
interested
gonna
in me
kidnap
or
my
this, that, and the
kids.
other,
They always think
right?
that.
That's right. And the thing is,
Yeah.
I think the sad thing is that because you go overseas and you meet all these different people who you're like, I would never probably normally talk to that person, or I would never normally meet that person. You
Hmm.
get back home and you're like, man, I bet most of the people on the street could probably get along.
Yeah.
I bet most of these people on the street, if they gave each other a chance, they could probably, have more friends than they currently have and feel less alone than maybe they feel. But it's hard to get out of that.
I didn't mean to have this conversation just go in this TCK direction immediately. I think our initial game plan was like we're supposed to talk about how we came to this idea of this podcast, but I
Oh,
mean,
okay. Well, yeah.
I mean, I don't really. It's weird because like when I say to my friends like, oh yeah, I'm doing a podcast tonight with my ex principal from high school, they're like, why do you still talk to your ex principal from high school? But it's because of
Mm,
this TCK culture where I'm like, everyone
mm,
just knew each other, like
yeah.
it was so like a tight knit community. And I don't know how to explain the kind of closeness that develops when you're in these communities. Like these are
Right.
lifelong friends. These are people who I can never replicate these
Mm,
relationships with people when I come back to America, because it's just sometimes it's just so unique and so special in my opinion. Like I've
right.
been chasing that feeling ever since I've started college and I left Saudi. Like I've never found
Yeah.
people who I can relate to in the same way ever.
Yeah. And it's the same when you're working, like the people you get closer to different teachers and people you work with also when you're an expat than you ever did when like kind of I was at home, just because you automatically end up knowing people's families, right? People come with their families, and all your families, oftentimes their kids are going to the same school.
Yeah.
Y'all live in the same areas and stuff like that. You do things together. So yeah, man, it's a really hard to explain to people the environment, right? And when I knew that I was going to be leaving the education field and getting into something different,
Yeah.
I was like, who do I know? Like, who are my connections that I know who might know something about this? And it was
Hmm.
like, oh, Noor. Noor's like into art and practical stuff and everything else,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I'm like, yeah, she used to be a student, but
Mhm.
now she's an adult, and I
Yeah.
don't know, reach out to her and see what she knows, right? And then that
Uh-huh.
level of, and that's how, and then we started talking, and
Yeah.
but yeah, so but and if I had been a different type of principal, maybe I don't know, maybe you would have been like,
Ooh.
well,
I don't
guy,
okay. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about this. And we could definitely cut it out. But I had a
well,
friend whom I don't really speak to anymore. We've had our differences, but she really insinuated that I was getting like groomed and like getting like what we were doing was like illegal and it should like you should be in jail. And I remember I mentioned to this you when I was to you when I was about to leave your house after a day of recording,
that's so
and your
dark.
face,
That's
dude, your
so
face
dark.
was like this. Like you were like,
Yeah, I
what?
mean,
And then this
dude, it's
like,
so dark. It's so dark, and I felt so sad that, like, I don't know, like, that was the first thing that came to this person's head. And I'm like, oh, that's so ugly. That's so
it was
nasty.
so, and that was one of like a huge point of contention in our friendship where I was like, I don't think I'm getting groomed. And then she'd be like, yeah, the victims usually don't think so anyway. And I'm like,
Oh man. She thought I was a monster. I'm like
dude,
trying to like send out a positive message and
I
like help
know.
people.
And I was like, just look at his videos. I'm like, he's really nice. Like, I don't think he's an awful guy. And then it was so bad that and I was so in my head about it that I messaged Miss Libby that day. And I was like, hey, I need to talk to you because I don't know
You
what's
didn't,
going.
you didn't tell me this.
Because
You were actually investigating me or something
no,
behind what did you do? No, no, no,
I
no.
wasn't investigating you. I was just like, I just wanted a third party who's like, yeah, like she's also my teacher and I like she knows you, she knows
Yeah.
me. And I just needed to like have someone tell me that I'm not crazy and you're not crazy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I mean, we spoke and she's like, no, 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 no. You have to she said consider the source of who you're talking to. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
facts, facts, facts. This is like an American who's never experienced
Uh-huh.
like an overseas school. And
Sure.
like everyone in I don't know, you just get this like close nature with like the staff of the school because it's only like 600 or less kids like in totality
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like
yeah.
freshman
Mhm.
to senior year. My graduating
That's right.
class was like 130 kids and like
That's right. Hmm.
there's no way that you don't know everybody and their little brother and their mom and their cousin and stuff like
Sure.
that.
Sure.
So
Sure.
but
For sure. Yeah.
that was insane.
It's so dark, man. But well, I'm glad I'm glad you're able to get through it. And we're working together because I think it's
Yeah.
good stuff. And
For the
and I
record,
mean, and
he's
part of the
not.
reason.
He's not a.
Oh,
I'm just. I'm
thank
just
you,
saying.
Nora,
Yeah, yeah. Just.
for just clearing it up for the
Yeah, yeah,
record.
yeah. Just for
I
the folks
appreciate it.
at home, Mr. C is not a creep. Thank God. Hallelujah.
All right. Well,
Should we title
but
this video "Mr. C is not a creep"? Hmm.
we could do that. We could do that, and I
Yeah.
think it that could be clickbait. Could be
Yeah.
clickbait. Who knows?
Yeah. Now you're thinking
Anyway,
social media expert. I'm so proud of you.
anyway, but you know what? You're talking when you're talking, and when we were talking about having this, because you've been helping me with mindset and craft, be good
Mhm.
podcast, all that kind of stuff. Um, and you do awesome work,
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
through working together and the conversations we were having,
Mhm.
we would just get into conversations about life and
Yeah.
perspective. We
Yeah.
would get into conversations about just, well, what I consider mindset and craft stuff,
Yeah.
just in our conversations about life and everything else. And so
Mhm.
what I really liked though was what I was seeing is it definitely seemed that when we were talking about things, we were
Mhm.
talking about things in a way that doesn't necessarily fit into one particular category. And I do think that there's a lot of people out there. I mean, as there's more mixed people, there's expats who've been all seen a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I feel the pressure sometimes in the States to fit yourself into one particular category.
Yeah.
And so we kind of it was actually my wife who came up with the name Other Americans,
Yeah, yeah, she's dope at that. So
but
good.
when we were but I think when we were talking, I mean, and I was explaining to her, it was just that having these conversations about life, about our experiences, about just we're different generations, right? We come from different backgrounds, right? But yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I need to share our my vision board because I feel like it
Oh,
explains everything perfectly.
oh, okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I feel like the folks at home would enjoy it. Okay.
Nora loves her vision boards. She got really excited about this
Okay,
vision board.
Mr. C didn't appreciate it enough. I'm just gonna say that.
I did appreciate your vision board.
Yeah, but it was like after. Oh, that's why is that showing? It was like
Well, yeah, oh, I see what you did there. You did there.
but it was after like all of that. After I showed it to whatever. He eventually got there. But this is the vision, guys, right?
This is what I bring to the table, guys: stats, knowledge, ancient wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
humor, funk,
Yeah,
culture, non-culture,
yeah.
Gen X,
I don't know.
with a question mark.
I don't know if
I
you're
am.
Gen
I
X.
am the cusp
Okay,
of
okay.
Gen X, and I'm the youngest Gen X, oldest millennial type of thing.
Okay, okay.
And then parent, man, non-religious, spiritual, but yes,
Yeah.
spiritual. And then you want to read your three
Yeah,
problems?
yeah. So I'm Gen Z, clearly. Single, sadly. Woman, unfortunately, sometimes. Religious, as best as I can. Um, but this is where we coalesce, right? So humor, funk, culture, non-culture.
Culture, non-culture.
And then what I bring to the table, pop culture, media literacy, and I'm cute.
Indeed, indeed.
I couldn't think of a third one, which is kind of sad in hindsight, but like I was like, you know what?
You just bring a cuteness and a vibe
Yeah,
to it. And this is the thing too, is that I am not a big pop culture guy, which I
no.
also think that it'll be fun to get into conversations about as we go.
Yeah.
Because Noor is all about that pop culture. She has all kind of cool things
Oh
going
yeah.
on there that
So
she
like
looks at.
my vision for this podcast is very like wide. Like I don't think that there's this podcast will only be about like TCKs or all the stuff that we were discussing today. There's so much
Mm.
that Mr. C and I just talk about, and it's like the sometimes the funniest conversations that I ever like have in my life.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's
and I
fun.
think that yeah, and that's what we wanted to do is have a podcast where we could just talk, where we could just talk about things, and then also people who are listening, people who are watching, if they're throwing stuff they'd like to hear us,
Yeah,
talk about. If there's some folks out there who have some diverse experiences or whatever, and say, well, hey, what do y'all think about this or
yeah,
what about that? I mean, whatever it is, and this is kind of where we just talk about whatever it is, whatever people want
yeah,
to throw out. As ridiculous as you may think it is,
yeah.
we'll cover some things and just have some fun.
So on this vision board, it says,
Oh, so intercultural parenting,
mhm,
LDR. What is LDR?
long distance relationships.
Long distance relationships,
Mm-hmm,
mentorship and friendship,
mm-hmm.
love across
Right?
cultures.
Travel, food, forgiveness, journal sharing.
Oh God, look at this. TCK views. Do intersectionality, identity,
Mm-hmm.
multicultural family dynamics, upbringing, all that kind of stuff.
And then I wanted to talk about DHS days or B days, high school days. But you know,
That could be very particular. We might have a segment where anybody who used to go to DHS, if they have like a question or they want to they pull in one DHS day question, sure,
mhm.
we'll answer it, and I'll try to be as honest as I can without revealing names.
Dude, I want to talk about the chicken. I want to talk about prank days, senior prank days. I want to talk about senior roast days because you were the biggest hater for senior roast days, and there's a respect there that I have for that. So it's
I ended senior roast.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
no longer exist.
Okay, whatever. But like, I want to not spill the tea, but I want to discover some data. Anyways,
Okay. One day.
relationships, faith and
Mhm.
spirituality, career journeys,
That's
and
right.
so like these are just so many ideas, but I feel like because of who we are and like our experiences, like sometimes they can just be very like socioeconomic backgrounds and upbringing have such an effect on all of these things, right?
Right. Right.
And so like
And we hit a lot of those different factors. We hit those different perspectives, right? So, and I feel like that's actually what's missing a lot of in our today's dialogue, society, everything else is missing a lot of the conversations between people from different backgrounds, right? These perspectives, and that something can be both things at the same time, right? It could be this and it could be a little bit of this, and that's okay. And so I hope that we can have those kind of conversations honestly and openly for people who don't feel like maybe there's that many places where people are having those kind of conversations.
but yeah, we just want to talk. Can we just talk? Can we just talk? Talk
I'm
about
sure karaoke lifestyle will come up in our conversations
oh
at
yeah.
some
Music.
point in time.
Oh, I didn't put music on there.
And you put Dungeons and Dragons either, because Dungeons and Dragons is very important as
I don't
well.
know. I don't know if I want to talk about that.
And no, I'm not a nerd.
You know, the first step is acceptance. And I feel like I feel like once you get there, just the process will get a lot smoother, you know.
D&D lifestyle. It's amazing. We'll talk about it.
I mean, okay, I'm not gonna lie, I wanted to do a one shot before
Mm-hmm.
I left Saudi, but it just never really happened. But it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you guys gonna do it
Don't worry.
virtually now?
We'll get you. I don't know. You have to find, could be, but I think everybody has to find their own campaigns where they go. And so probably they're going to have
Wow.
campaigns here as I leave, and I'll find someone in Bali or someone who wants to play some D&D.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Where there's Asians, there's nerds for sure.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, well, I
Uh-uh.
mean, I'm really excited about this podcast. I
Looking
never
forward to
thought
it.
that I would ever be talking into a mic as many people do nowadays. Um
Mm-hmm.
I always thought it was kind of like let's stop giving people microphones. You know what I'm saying? Like
Sure.
sometimes I'm like maybe you don't need to make a podcast. And we'll
Right.
find out if that's going to be us.
Yes. Hey, did I ever think that I would be on social media, like trying to reach people through
Mm-mm.
social media? No, I never
Yeah.
thought that, right? But I think the thing is, as long as we just keep it to having the usual conversations we might usually have, normal
Yeah.
conversations, and hopefully someone finds something helpful and
Mm-hmm.
maybe lights up their day a little bit, or
Mm-hmm.
connects with something and be like, "Yeah, man, that's a good
Yeah.
perspective," or hey, then that's all right.
I want to know. I keep like flip flopping to ideas, but like going back to the friendship stuff, like, do you think that it's important to just kind of like say that, yeah, maybe these friendships are unique to the place that I used to live in, and I just need to not forget about it, but like allow it to exist in its own entity and kind of like accept that it's going to be different wherever I am.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Tell me more.
So like because I'm okay, I'm gonna share something that I was writing during my university days, and I made an art piece about it. And
Oh, all right.
it was so dramatic. It was so like,
Ooh.
I hope I can find it. It's in my it's in my journal. I know where it is. I just have to open it.
I like how you're like, it was so dramatic. It was
It
so
it was because like every time that I read it, I'm like, dude, calm the fuck down. Like you're just like an emo kid. Like go out
oh,
and take a walk in sunshine and you'll be fine, you know?
yeah. I think it's normal. People go through their emo phases, right? It's all good.
Mr. C, do you have emo music?
Emo music?
Yeah, did you ever listen to emo music growing up? I know that you grew up in like the hood, but
What's considered emo music?
like crawling in my skin, you know,
Oh,
stuff like that.
I
No?
don't know if I've heard that song in particular. I mean bands. Like, what are some bands that would be considered emo music?
Like, do you know Evanescence?
Yeah, I never listened to Evanescence.
Okay, like Green Day,
Green Day. I remember
Yeah.
when they were popular in the '90s. Their first couple of songs. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and like
But
angsty,
it was like punk music at the time.
like Nirvana, like grungy,
Okay, like grunge
emo.
music. No, I mean I heard that was in
Yeah.
the '90s. Yeah, that was like grunge music. I listened to some of that. Yeah.
But like you didn't have any like side bang black eyeliner moment.
No, that was not my thing. No.
Yeah. I wish you had that phase. I feel like it'd be so interesting to see Mr. C in that light. Okay, I found it.
Oh, you found it. Okay, go ahead.
And just trigger warning to everyone listening. This is going to be cringe and this is going to be embarrassing. But I this is how I felt when I was writing it. So this is
Oh,
April.
okay, okay. Trigger
and
warning. This.
and by the way, I published this in like a magazine and like a bunch of people read it. like, and I really regret it. like I regret it.
Read, please. I'm
Okay, okay,
intrigued.
okay.
Go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care what people think. Okay, let's go. So, sometimes I wonder if that was just it. Like the few impactful years that molded me have just completely vanished, as if they never existed. Who am I in this moment without the people that mattered to me the most? Where are the people that made me feel like I belonged somewhere? Everyone's scattered, alone, and forced to live in an unfamiliar place. The past bleeds into my presence with chapters that never seem to end. How do I move past this feeling? The lines of then and now are blurred, and the strings that tie the present to the future reach beyond anything that I can touch. So dramatic, sorry. I am stuck in a binding blizzard where the shards of ice nip at my flesh and suffocate me in overwhelming loneliness. Their superficial slices
Wow.
serve as reminders that I will never return to the time and place I loved so dearly. My being is being claimed in ways I cannot recognize anymore, and my attempts to preserve the sanctity of my culture and religion exist as a never ending war within myself.
Mm. Okay. There was a lot going on there.
God. Yeah, she was this girl. She was hurting.
Yeah.
She was in pain. And this is what 2022. So this is like a
Just 2
year
years
before,
ago.
yeah, a year before I graduated. I think I was just like depressed at that time too. Like that was rough,
But
but
but that was like COVID. And you
post
were in
COVID,
college,
yeah.
yeah?
Yeah,
Post
yeah, yeah.
COVID in college.
Yeah.
And I feel like, at least from my experience, like having alumni reach back out
Mm-hmm.
to me. So
Yeah.
it is very common that I have alumni from DHS, ASD, from the high school that reach back out to me when they're in college or,
Yeah.
even after. And there's a lot of it's normal. I think feelings of loneliness or just kind of being in a different spot are fairly
Yeah.
normal, sadly, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know if that maybe was exacerbated by even COVID and everything else, right?
Oh, for sure.
But but uh but yeah, I feel like, do you feel like, I mean, when you were looking back at it,
Yeah.
do you feel like that was a phase? Can you look back at it and say, man, I know why I was feeling that way? Or
Yeah.
or what?
I mean, I understand her still. I'm saying her
Yeah.
as my past self. And
Yeah.
like there's it's still that feeling still exists, but I think that I've come to terms with it a lot more where
Mm.
I was talking to my friend Aranza about this and I was because she also
Shout out
has
Arantha.
shout out Aranza.
Mm.
But we often talk about our relationships and friendships and stuff like that. And she also has that same feeling, but
Mm.
it's kind of like it depends on the person when you come to terms with that feeling where it's
Mm.
like those relationships are very sacred to some people and very special and unique, and to attempt to replicate it is just a dead end because of how unique and special it is, and you just have to accept that where you are now it's going to be different, it's going to be new, and it's not going to be the same that we
Yeah.
grew up with. And I feel like that's also just part of growing up in general. But there's this feeling
Mm.
of like grief and loss that comes with it where I'm like, oh my God,
Sure.
this kind of sucks and
Yeah.
I'm never going to have that feeling again.
Well, you know what? Yeah, and I think that that's, yes, it's never going to be exactly the same as that time,
Yeah.
right? There's an old saying, right? You can't step into the same waters twice. So even if you took those people now and you all decided to move back to that place, it would still be different because you're different, right? I think that that's why, uh, there's a book I talked about in one of my podcasts. There's a book called Bittersweet, which I think is really good, and it talks about this feeling that we have. Like the most popular songs are the songs that are listened to the most are bittersweet songs. They're songs that combine a little bit of sadness and a little bit of a happiness and a
Yeah.
longing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that that's indicative of the human experience, right?
Yeah.
Because time is fleeting, right? You
Yeah.
don't get it all back, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I do think that, yeah, the main thing is what I try to do is when I have those moments and I think back to those moments, I try to let them remind me to stay in the moment when I'm experiencing it.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I know I'm going to probably miss this.
Yeah.
I know at some point in time I'm going to miss this. So let me be here.
Right.
Um, let me complain less
Mm-hmm.
because there's probably something about this that once it's gone, once these people are gone,
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, man, I wish I hadn't spent so much time, arguing about that. Right.
Mm. Mm.
Um, I'll tell you a story, and it's
Yeah.
related to parenting,
Okay.
but I think it fits in here.
Yeah.
A good friend that I had, his name was Indu. He was a librarian when I worked in India. He was talking to me, um, and I saw him just kind of like thinking hard. And I was like, what are you thinking about?" He goes, "I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about my daughter." I was like, "Okay." And he goes, "I just visited her."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "All right." I was like, "Okay." He goes, "She's doing very well." I'm like, "Okay." It seemed like he should be happier about this, right?
Right.
She's doing
Right.
very well. I'm like, "Okay." And I was like, "Okay." And then I was like, "Why do you seem sad though?" He goes, "Well,"
Yeah.
he goes, "I went to her." He goes, "The entire time that she grew up, she
Mm-hmm.
was always messy." And he's a librarian, by the way, right? He goes, "So she's like, she was always messy. She was always disorganized."
Right.
He goes, "And I would try, no matter how many times I would try to teach her how to keep
Right.
things in order, this, that, and the other. She was always all over the place. She couldn't
Right.
keep her room clean, this, that, and the other." And he was going through and they would fight all the time about these things. And
Uh-huh.
he would try really hard to get her to do this, to get her to do that.
Yeah.
And there was constant conflict about this.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay." And he goes, "And I visited her, and
Yeah.
she has two. She's married, and she's very, very happy. And she's still just as disorganized and disheveled as she's ever been." Right? And it's interesting because like she
Yeah.
was now in her late 20s by that time. She was
Mm-hmm.
married. She was happy. She had her kids, everything else.
Yeah.
And what it made him think about was, he said, "How much time did I waste arguing about something that didn't really matter?
Mm. Gotcha.
How much time did we spend fighting about something
Mm-hmm.
that was never going to change about her,
Right.
and it didn't need to change? Like
Mm-hmm.
she's successful, she's happy, and
Yeah.
everything else." And I took that for my own kids. I was like, okay, let me like not be fighting with my own, because I'm gonna miss them.
Right.
Like when
Right.
they're
Mm-hmm.
gone, and I won't have that. But I think in relationships in general, I've always tried to think of, man, like, can you think about it? Like, you think about maybe that time you were missing, or those relationships you were missing.
Mm-hmm.
How many little conflicts that you have as you think about now, and you're like, shit, that probably wasn't worth
No,
that.
like it's funny because I mean I don't mean to interrupt your flow, but
Yeah,
when I do have like the nostalgia talks with my friends who are from Saudi, and it's very sparse now because everyone is like married and they're doing their own
yeah,
thing and jobs and careers, and it's only like once in a while where we're able to really deep
hmm,
dive into each other's lives. But when we're reminiscing, all of that serious stuff that happened in high school is so menial. Like it doesn't matter at all now, and we laugh about it. But at the time, it was like, oh yeah,
yeah,
I didn't talk to you for 3 months because of that, or like like we did. Like
right,
I like
right.
we didn't go to the party with you because of that, or all this stuff, and we blamed you for this. And now it's just like, oh, I I don't know, but it's just youthful, you know, it's just youthful memories where I'm just like, oh yeah, but we were kids and
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
just fun, you know, like we were just
Mhm,
being
mhm.
stupid. But then
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't know if it's more of like maybe those like there are elements of yeah, those memories are unique to where I was and who I was with.
Mhm.
But maybe it's also just like the idea of letting go of childhood and letting go of
Yeah.
that feeling of youth. Even okay,
Mhm.
I'm 22, but like I still feel like I'm 17. Like some people will ask me like, "Oh, how old are you?" I'm like, 22. And I'm like, "Oh shit." So I
Yeah,
don't know.
man.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I definitely understand what you're saying, but it's just like I don't know how to let that feeling go where it's like, "Oh, these were my people." And now it's just like it just never feels the same.
It's yeah, and I mean I think what you're saying is just human. Is that
Yeah.
happens, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way to not have that happen. There's a good philosopher, ancient wisdom. His
Ancient
name was
wisdom. There we
Kinko.
go. Kinko.
Kinko. He was a Buddhist, a Zen Buddhist who retired and wrote these essays called Essays on Idleness. And one of them, he talks about that it is the fleeting nature of things that make them beautiful. He said childhood wouldn't be beautiful if it lasted forever. He goes, a flower wouldn't be beautiful. It's only beautiful when it blossoms because it's going to fall away. It's only
Yeah.
temporary. And he says that scenes like art, things that you would paint. I mean, the whole thing of
Yeah.
art is trying to capture something that you know can't actually stay for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful because it has to be captured, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's so much of life is the it's fleeting,
Yeah.
but it's trying to remember that there's beauty in it throughout.
Yeah. It's I don't know if it's a meme, but like the kids say it a lot where it's like, I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
man.
I never really understood that until I like left the bubble of Saudi.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's why for thousands of years people have been trying to figure out how to be mindful, how to be grateful, how to be in the moment.
Yeah.
Because we recognize that, but it's so hard because we get distracted, we get
Yeah.
busy, we get everything
Mm-hmm.
else, and there's so many things. It's hard to recognize that when are you in the good old days, right? But
Yeah.
I think the way that I try to look at it is I'm probably always living the good old days. I should probably try to recognize it while I'm
Mm-hmm.
in it to my ability.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I still have a lot to learn, many years ahead. Hopefully, cross your fingers, knock on wood, inshallah.
Hey, we all do. We all do. No one has it all figured out. No one has
Definitely.
it all figured out.
But
Cool.
we can all try to you know, figure it out and we'll continue to try to figure out on this podcast. Thank you. That was me trying to that was me trying to do a segue. I don't know how effective it was, but
All right.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Cool.
Thank you for joining us, guys. We have about this is gonna be a long ass podcast. It's like about an hour and a half at this point.
It's all right. There's podcasts that go like an hour, 2 hours. You Jocko Willink. I listen to some of his podcasts. Sometimes they're like 3 hours long, so it's all good.
Damn. I mean,
Mhm,
wow, good
mhm,
for him. Anyways,
mhm.
but thank you guys for listening. Or if you did not listen this long, I'm gonna say a word, and if you listen this long and you write the word in the comments, you'll get a prize. Banana.
Cool.
So if you comment banana, I'll send you a something. We'll figure it out. Uh,
Okay.
this
I am
was
sorry to
yeah.
anybody that Nora's lying to right now. If she is lying, I don't know
Hey,
if she's
hey,
gonna
whoa,
censor me.
whoa, whoa. So
Yeah.
thank you for listening. I was your host, Nur Sultan. Your co-host is
Ronnie Caldwell, Mr. C.
you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, all the platforms. And we'll see you on the next one.
All right. Y'all be good.